our concepts to actually the relationship and change those patterns, family patterns for most people have lasted at least 18, 15, however long your child's been alive. Those family patterns have existed. Undoing family patterns is so difficult. I've dealt with it in my own family, and undoing those roles and trying to respond differently to people is so difficult. And I think that's why a lot of people just want to blame the user.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred mental health and addiction treatment option to help newcomers on their path to recovery. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Phoenix, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Today, I'm here with Paul Krauss MA LPC. Paul is the Clinical Director of Health for Life Counseling Grand Rapids, which is the home of the Trauma-Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids. Paul is also a private practice psychotherapist and approved EMDRIA consultant, host of the Intentional Clinician podcast, behavioral health consultant, clinical trainer, and counseling supervisor. He's now offering consulting for a few individuals and organizations as well. He's the creator of the National Violence Prevention Hotline, as well as the Intentional Clinician Training Program for counselors. He's been quoted in the Washington Post, NBC News, Wired Magazine, and Counseling Today magazine. Paul, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you, Tim. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm excited. You are the host of the Intentional podcast, and I'm just, Intentional Recovery is kind of the title that we came up with. So it's all about being intentional. And I think that's good, because you don't just get sober.
No.
You don't just fix your mental health. It doesn't just happen. You don't just all of a sudden you're no longer an addict, or you're no longer addicted, or you're no longer drinking, or you're no longer using, or you're no longer depressed. It really, like everything, really, you have to be intentional in order to get better, because it's healing and things don't just go away.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, there's been so many families of teens and young adults that I've worked with over the years that would just sort of wish and hope that one day they would just see the light bulb turn on and decide to quit using drugs or alcohol or whatever they were using that to be addicted to. Could have been screens, and that they would just kind of wake up and become an adult. And I've never seen that happen. To this day, I'm still batting a zero for that. People have to learn their own way, but if they really put effort in, and that, what I mean by that is intentional effort, which is, I guess, what you're calling this show, being intentional about what you're trying to do and your belief systems and your attitudes behind that, you will get sober, you will be able to recover. But there are barriers for everybody to getting sober. There's barriers to recovery, and there's barriers to healing. So being intentional can help you through those things, but that takes a lot of, I think, usually when we're first starting out, a lot of help from other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Definitely. Trying to do something that you've never done before, typically asking for help is going to be the best way to go about it. So before we dig into things, tell me a little bit about you and why you're passionate about working with parents and working with their children.
Well, when I first started out as a therapist in the 07 and 08 of 2000, I eventually got into a program where I was working with about 50% of my clients were on probation and parole for substance issues, and they were teens. And I really developed a passion for working with them because they had so many difficulties in their life, so many things stacked against them. A lot of them were in poverty. A lot of them had difficult parent relationships. A lot of them had barriers, social barriers. They didn't have a lot of opportunities that kids maybe in the suburbs or from a family that had more access or money had. And a lot of them turn to drugs and alcohol to feel better, to calm down, or to party, depending on the kid. And I really developed a passion because when they came in for therapy, a lot of them are mandated by the state
Mhm.
or by the
Mhm.
probation department or parole. And there's a kind of a big misconception that if somebody's mandated, they're not going to be a good client. That's totally untrue, right? It depends on the person. And actually being mandated might actually help the person be able to take it seriously. So a lot of them had to come in, and if they didn't come in, the PO would look at the attendance record. It was my only thing we had to disclose, and they would just say, "Oh, they didn't come in. Okay, well, spend the weekend in the juvenile hall." That did not
Right.
sound good to anybody. So
Right.
they would come in, and sometimes they wouldn't talk, and sometimes they would. But I learned a program to work with teens because at first I didn't know how to help them because I knew that scaring them wouldn't work. I knew that like telling them all about the evils of drugs and alcohol and what it can do to you wasn't going to work. I knew that showing them pictures of people on meth wasn't going to do any good. So I learned this program called the Adolescent Community Reinforcement Approach. And I saw people's lives turn around in incredible ways. I saw these kids, they weren't always getting 100% sober, but harm reduction or getting to the point where they weren't having a substance use diagnosis anymore. And some got completely clean as well. It was just dependent on the person. They would do incredible things. They would all of a sudden start getting A's and B's in high school again or middle school. They would get off parole and probation. They would join a sport. They would get into journalism, arts, get into relationships, and they were just like so happy. And this would happen in a short time frame because they're kids. Things happen a little bit faster because your brain is still learning. So some of these situations would turn around within 4 to 5 months, and it was just incredible to see that. And I felt really good about that. And then I became a trainer in that model because of the way that Arizona was needing trainers in that. And so I became a trainer in that. And I trained therapists for the next 10 or 11 years after that. So that's how I got passionate about it. Yeah.
And I like what you said about just because someone's mandated to go to treatment, mandated to
Hmm.
get sober. I mean, a lot of people are like they're given an ultimatum by their parents, by their wife, by their husband, by their loved one, by their family. Like, you can't come home if you don't, you got to go to treatment, whatever. Regardless, it doesn't really matter how somebody gets to treatment or how somebody gets clean and sober. Eventually, it has to be for them for it to stick, but it
Hmm.
doesn't matter how they get there.
That's
Has been my
correct.
experience.
I agree with you 100%. That's my experience as well. One thing that bothered me about some of the Al Anon stuff was that, like, we're powerless. We can't do anything. Like the family meetings, like,
Mhm.
oh, just
Right.
hands off, hope for the best. I got to hit rock bottom. Da 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 da. And some of the Al-Anon, I don't want to rip on Al-Anon. Some of the Al-Anon meetings are phenomenal when it comes to boundaries and talking about these sort of things. But some of the ones were privy to weren't talking about the things that family members can do, and the family members have so much influence that they don't understand how to use it. Especially parents of teens had the most influence, but even parents of young adults, family members of young adults, even adults, you have so much influence. But all of you are in a family dynamic pattern and everybody is playing possibly unconscious or conscious roles, and that can feed the substance use person in a way that isn't helpful for them, right? And that can enable them by accident, maybe sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, to not have to look at their issues in the mirror, right? We want to save our family members. We don't want them to die from drugs and alcohol. We want to keep helping and buy them a new car and talk to their teachers out of flunking them and talk to the other parents that were at the party and apologize for them, and not letting them have the consequences is so bad to not have natural consequences. So there's a couple books I latched onto that I really liked. One is called Getting Your Loved Ones Sober by Dr. Robert Myers and Susan Myers, I believe is his wife. Getting Your Loved Ones Sober, really cool book, written at the 6th grade level. Anybody can read it. It's super cool.
Mhm.
It just teaches you about boundaries and it teaches you about communication. Another book is called The 4 Seasons of Recovery for Parents of Addicted Loved Ones by Michael Speakman from the Parents of Addicted Loved Ones group. A
Love,
phenomenal
love,
book.
love Michael Speakman.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah,
We're
he's
we
great.
are we are in touch all the time.
Yeah,
And
he's great.
he's mentored me for years. And anyway, the book teaches you there's so much you can do, but it's actually doing less. So it's not doing nothing, right? It's not the nothing
Mhm.
hands-off
Mhm.
approach. It's that actually you can utilize your strength of your inner being to be honest and affirming of that person. You know, I see the good person in you. I see the potential in you, right? And I'm going to set these boundaries with you, which usually involve money and time and space and property. And these are my boundaries,
Hmm.
but I'm still going to love you, right? I'm still going to
Right.
love you. I'm still going to invest in this relationship. If you're yelling at me, then I'm going to end the conversation. We can meet in a public place if that's what it takes. If it takes that we meet at a horrible chain restaurant at 1 p.m. in a public venue that's very crowded, because that way you won't abuse me verbally, I'm still going to invest in you, right?
Hmm.
But I'm not going to give you my money, give you my keys, give you a free place to live. Mike Speakman had worked with families where he had people saying, "Hey, I'm calling you about my son, or I'm calling you about my daughter." And he says, "Oh, well, you know, who are they? Maybe I'll work with you." And how old are they? "Oh, they're 50." Wait, the son is 50? The daughter's
Right.
50? Right. So I mean, if you don't stop this stuff, the pattern continues. You got to early
Right.
intervention is key. So
Right.
the adolescent community reinforcement approach and other programs emphasize early intervention by family therapy, individual therapy, trauma therapy, helping the client get to the root cause. But the other thing that is missing from most therapy practices in with working with teens is not just focusing on the negative. What does that child like to do? What does
Mm.
that young adult like to do? What are they interested in? Anything they're interested in that would be considered pro-social, you know, not just a withdrawing. Oh, I'm interested in social media and video games. Okay, so is everybody, right? That's
Right.
not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that can be for very few people, that's a livable, marketable skill. But for something that they're interested in, whether it be sports or music or theater or, you know, I don't know, starting their own business of cleaning cars, whatever it could be, right? Getting them into some positive activity with other youth or other people their age that aren't using tons of drugs and alcohol can be life changing. The parents changing their relationship to that teen or that young adult, that has more impact than any therapist ever will. Okay. But the therapist probably needs to be involved to help that happen. So back to you.
Right. Okay, so you talked about essentially setting boundaries and having this hard conversation with your child, which that's a I mean, to me, I hear that conversation, and it's not like something that somebody can just pick up. It seems
No,
like somebody really needs to be taught how to have this conversation with their son or with their daughter or with their loved one in order for it to be effective and to really get the message across correctly. So, what's the like how can people learn how to have this conversation?
well, there's lots of ways to learn it, but I will tell you this. You're right. Every time almost anyone I've ever talked to has tried this without any intervention or help or learning or education, it fails miserably
Mm,
because the parent is usually, or the loved one or the significant other is so upset and worried about that person's life and where is this going to go and where is our relationship going and are they going to die and are they going to take money, that they are so caught up in their own fear and sadness and grief and lost expectations that it comes out sometimes in anger, or it comes out too passively. It doesn't
mhm.
come off assertively. It comes out all jumbled. It's too long of a conversation. And so how can they get this help? I think the best way is probably to go to your own individual therapist to understand substance use. You need to go to a therapist that understands substance use. You cannot just go to any old therapist. I mean, you could, but I'd prefer somebody that understands how to set boundaries and is into that, because you can practice with that therapist and you can get ideas and you can uncover and get free of some of your fears around your child or your loved one or your significant other that are filtering the way you talk to them. Another way is reading books. There are many good books on how to set boundaries. And honestly, though, you need to practice. You got to start
Mhm,
practicing with other people in
mhm.
your life in real
Right,
time, not fake conversations, not just role plays, real
right.
conversations. Podcasts, some people have really good podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube, this podcast, you know, things like that. But you really have to spend some time on it. It is not something you could just pick up from one. I listened to this one podcast on Friday. Now I'm going to go talk to my son and
Right,
have an
right,
intervention. That's not
right,
going to work. You have to physically take time and you have to mentally and emotionally be in a place to be able to have the conversation, or else it is going to backfire so bad. It is going to backfire, and it could, and that kid may, or that loved one may say, I'm not talking to you about this anymore. You lost your chance. So take it
mhm.
seriously. If you think that you've got the skills to do it, think again. Okay. Because I have the skills to talk to anybody about it. Right. But if it's my own family member, my skills are going to suck. And I do this for a living. because I'm going to be possibly triggered. I'm going to be upset. I'm going to have lost expectations. I'm going to be disappointed. Who knows what, right? I'm going to be angry at them. So you've got to get coaching, I think, which would be therapy. And you've got to practice and start putting some boundaries in your life. That's what I think you got to do. And I think there's many ways to learn it. So those are some.
Now, Paul, is this something that you teach at your clinic, at your
I'm,
practice?
I would say, yeah, all the therapists at my clinic, almost all of them have experience in this, and they would teach you these things. They would also recommend books because I think you got to learn all the ways: audio, real life, books. That way it's really sinking in there. But the therapist would also work with you on what are you triggered about with this loved one. Because and they would work on reducing your triggers, maybe utilizing EMDR or another type of therapy so that you can go into it clear-headed, having a plan. You might even write out what you're going to say and read it to them.
Right.
Because it's so difficult. Because I had so many people asking me this, I actually developed a course. It's for like $12 on udemy.com. It's called Parents of Young Adults, What Do We Do Now? And there's a whole segment on there about substance use and boundaries. So it's about I think it's 5 half-hour segments. And if people can't afford it, they can email me. I'll send them a free code, but it's $12. It's just basically paying for production costs. And you can easily Google it that with my name. So I went through, each half-hour lesson is about different situations I encountered. I changed the names, I changed the situations, but I used real cases, real situations, real people, and I taught a skill. But even that's not enough. I mean, that's a good start, but that it's something that it's a process to change. Just like it's going to be a process for your loved one to get sober. It's not something that happens overnight unless there's a miraculous situation. And honestly, it's probably only looking miraculous from the outside because that person has probably been battling their inner demons for months. They had some bad experiences they didn't tell you about. And then all of a sudden they're sober. It seems miraculous to you. Probably not. Probably was a process for them.
And stay tuned. We'll towards the end of this podcast, we'll give Paul's information and how to reach him and how to contact with him and find out more about him and his practice. How and when should parents discuss drugs and alcohol use with their children?
Well, it depends on the child and your culture. So if you live in the city of Phoenix, I would say around 7 or 8 years old because they're going to be exposed to it, right? In the suburbs of Phoenix, same age. You're going to be exposed to it. It just depends. Like some parents have their kids in like a homeschool thing where they're like monitoring them all the time. So maybe you can wait to 8, 9, 10. But we live in what Mike Speakman calls the drug age. Drugs are more available than ever. Alcohol sales, marijuana sales are breaking records in every state. Illegal drugs are easy to come by. There are hundreds of designer drugs that you can buy on the street or even in stores that are a few molecules off of the original drug, like bath salts and things like that. Mushrooms are being grown everywhere. I'm not like against, I'm not against necessarily people using those for medicinal purposes or anything like that, right? It's all about where you're using it in the context. But for children, they need to understand what's out there, right? And that they feel safe coming to you as a parent to talk about it. So when a parent talks to a child, it's not like, if you ever do these drugs, you better be, all of your video games will be locked away forever and you'll be shut in your room. That's not what the conversation needs to be about. Fear tactics don't work. If you're in a relationship, tell the other person, you know what, next time you do the dishes like this, I'm not going to talk to you for a week. See how that goes. Okay. Fear and authority tactics don't work, especially on kids. Kids are egocentric. They're trying to figure out what they can get away with, what they can't. Be honest with them. These things are out there. People do them. A lot of people get addicted. It ruins their whole life. They lose, a lot of things. Some people use them and they don't get addicted and they eventually move on and do other things in their life. Some people don't do them at all, right? They need to know about what these things are and that if they get tempted or people show them the drugs, that they can come talk to you, that you're open to listening to them, that you're not going to punish them for it, right? Now, you may set restrictions such as, if you do that, eventually when they're like 16, 15, 14, when they're really being exposed to it at school or on the bus routes, if you're doing that and I catch you, I'm definitely going to give you a penalty, a measured penalty. But shame and yelling at them and telling them they fucked up, excuse me, whoops, language, is not good. is not good. It doesn't help anything. Fear tactics do not work. The DARE program, in my opinion, was not too successful because it focused on how bad drugs were. And let me tell you, my fifth grade class was so interested in drugs after that. We were all excited. We were like, whoa, this is like cool stuff that cool people do. It
Yeah.
was not a good program, right? Versus later on, learning about them from an honest perspective. A lot of parents want to shield their kids. I don't want little Tommy and Jesse and Jill to know about drugs and bad people and things that are happening in our community. I don't want them to know that either, but it's happening everywhere. Okay. Your kid, this stuff is everywhere. It's in the suburbs. It doesn't discriminate. It's in the rich neighborhoods. It's in the poor neighborhoods. It's happening. It's everywhere you look. So being honest with your kids about what's going on to their age development level, right? Maybe don't tell them about shooting up heroin between toes and crack houses and things like, and human trafficking. Maybe it's a little too young for that, but explain what these things are. Let them know they can come to you. And then as they get older, keep the conversation going. Hey, I'm not trying to helicopter you, but, our kids at school smoking marijuana, our kids at school vaping, our kids at school using cocaine. Just curious. I want to have an open discussion with you. When kids know the options and they aren't being pushed one way or the other, they're more likely to come tell you. I know a mom, and she ever since this girl would hit puberty, she talked to her about consent and sex. And a lot of the other moms were going, oh my gosh, how dare you talk to your young daughter about this? Well, let me tell you, her daughter is like one of the most best behaved kids I've ever met. She does not get into trouble. She is like being very prudent, almost conservative when it comes to sexual relations and boyfriends and girlfriends and things. Whereas a lot of her peers whose parents refuse to talk to them about sex or shame them or scare them about it are all off having all sorts of relations and then getting the consequences of those, right? So I think the same goes for drugs. Keep the conversation open and be realistic about it. Your kids are probably going to try drugs. Unfortunately, they're going to, most likely.
I liked what you said earlier about kids needing to feel safe. And I think
Yes.
that's really what all of us want. We all want to feel safe. Everybody. We as human beings, we want to feel safe. Kids, they need to feel safe. So they need to feel safe around these conversations. So whatever parents can do, this is what I'm hearing you say anyways, is that parents like need to do whatever they can to help their children feel safe so that when they learn about drugs, they find out about drugs, alcohol, kids at school are partaking and for some people they might learn about drugs at 8, some people 10, some people 9, some people 7. Parents have to be kind of aware, but the main thing is that the kids need to feel safe so that when they do, so they can bring it up without feeling scared of the conversation, without feeling like they're going to get in trouble. Like they want to feel safe in having these conversations. And if they feel safe, then you're automatically going to be in a better position to help your kid out.
That's right. I mean, I think one of the hardest things about being a parent is the fact that you have diminishing control as your child grows up. You have less and less and less control over the child. And that brings up in the parent some deep emotional work that needs to be done to be able to have your child feel safe enough to talk to you. Deep emotional work on the parent's level that your kid is going to go through hard times and they're going to be exposed to what this culture has to offer. And our culture is a very drug heavy culture, whether it be medications or illegal drugs or legal drugs. We're one of the most heavily medicated and drug using societies in the world. It's going to affect them in some way or another. They're going to know somebody that's been affected by it or they're going to learn about it. And so, as a parent, balancing the safety of your child with information, but also not making them feel judged or less than or shameful or like they're a bad kid or anything for any reason they come to you and ask questions or any reason they open up to you. Those moments of them opening up are precious. Don't turn it into a lecture. Turn it into a real conversation. How do you wish your parents would have talked to you about drugs and alcohol if they did or they didn't, right? How do you wish your parents would have talked to you about your life choices? If we judge our children's life choices so hard from an early age, it sets them up to feel emotional strife with us. So after it's like this, that child wants to grow and they want to be something. They want to do something with their lives. Most children do. You can do everything you can to set them up for success. Schools, sports, reading clubs, social skills, therapy, all those things. But just understand they're going to have to make mistakes. So when your child makes mistakes, we got to be able to be accepting of them and not make them feel disowned or shamed, right, from those mistakes. But there needs to be consequences. I'm not saying there's not consequences, but
Right.
the consequences have to be dealt in a way that makes sense for the crime of whatever the child did, and they need to be measured, and they need to not be delivered with emotional negativity. They need to be delivered like an adult. Hey, like if I like, think about it like you're at a job. If you came in late for work and your boss is like, "Oh my gosh, again being late. Well, guess what? We're just all not going to sit with you at lunch because you're a dumbass." Excuse me, language, whatever. That would be the worst boss ever, and human resources would be involved and possibly a lawsuit. But if the boss says, "Hey, just letting you know, we've noticed a pattern of you being late, and if you're late again, we start having to dock off some of your pay, and we might have to write you up for human resources." Okay. Treat your child like that. Treat your child with respect. If we treat grown adults who should know better to be late to work with more respect than a child who's still growing and learning, why do we have these expectations that our children have to be these like perfect little beings? I don't understand that. So that's what I mean by that. Like, hey, you got caught smoking weed. I'm taking your smartphone away. I'm giving you a dumb phone. Okay. And you're grounded for the next 2 weekends. And maybe you can't hang out with this kid whose parents leave him completely unsupervised. But the consequences meet the crime. It's not like, all right, that's it. All summer, you're not going anywhere. We're taking away your vacation. We're taking away. No, that's a harsh punishment. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here. I'm kind of laughing. I'm thinking about working with my dogs,
Yeah.
and I mean it's kind of the same thing. Like my dog goes potty on the floor in the house. It's like, okay, that's not good here, and I put him in timeout for like, 2 minutes, and then it's like, okay, don't do that again. And it's like the as opposed to, I remember I had a friend when I was a kid. I don't know why I remember this. He had a dog, and the dog would go potty in the house, and he'd smack his dog like, don't do that, and shove his face in the shove his face in it. And it's like, how's that gonna work? So I just like, whether it's a dog or a child or just a person or an employee, it's treating people with respect and dignity, and the crime or the punishment or the consequence needs to be appropriate for the crime. And it's like,
Right.
dog goes potty in the house. It's like, hey, don't do that. Okay, here, go. You're gonna go to timeout. 2 minutes, and then like, guess what? They learn that they shouldn't go potty in the house.
That's right. And actually, I'm going to go with dogs and children here. But
Uh,
I actually talked to a dog trainer that said you had between 2 to 4 seconds to correct the dog before they forget what you're talking about, because everything is paired with dogs.
yeah,
And children are the same. Now you have more time with children, right? Because they can
right,
understand and reason, they have larger brains. But if a dog pees in the house, you immediately have to say no,
yeah,
or
yeah.
else they don't know what you're talking about. They think you're talking about something else. They don't know. They've already
They have
moved on
no
from the
clue.
peeing. They have no clue.
They're confused.
So they are not humans. They cannot understand why you're shoving their face in the floor, except they think you're mean. So the same
Right.
thing with children. It's like, hey, cut that out, and here's the consequence. Like, parents that give measured consequences know what the consequence, you know what your consequences are ahead of time. Don't deliver them in anger. Know what they are ahead of time. I've also heard of parents even saying like, hey, if you know, tell us the truth about this, you get a reward, and if you don't, you get a negative, right? I mean, having incentives are good for children too, because that's like the real world, right? If I'm telling the truth, well, hopefully, in my business and doing the right thing, I'm not going to get in trouble with the law, most likely, right? And if I'm lying and cheating, I might be able to get in trouble. That's like real life. So why don't we set up incentives for our children as well? Like, if you tell me the truth about what's happening at the party, I'm gonna definitely let you go out more. I'm gonna trust you more, right? If you don't tell me the truth and I find out otherwise, I'm not gonna trust you as much, right? It's that trust. But for children to trust you, you can't keep telling them what to do every second. That's the hard part. And so telling them not to use drugs all the time is not good. But saying, hey, here's the information about drugs. They can be very bad. Here's some of my experiences with drugs and alcohol. This is what, what happened to me. Oftentimes I leave that out till they're old enough. I would definitely not tell them until they're like 16, 18 about your
Right.
own experiences.
Right.
But other people are good examples because your children glom onto you. They want to be like you. So that's a little bit dangerous. But yeah, so it's like same thing with young adults. Boundaries are so important with parents and loved ones and significant others. And maintaining those boundaries is scary because the consequences of drug use when you're older and using more drugs and alcohol could be death, right? But that could be out of the, that could happen any day, right? Depending on the drug and depending on the alcohol dose. It's a scary thing. So it's just important to get educated about it as well. If you're a parent or a loved one and you don't know about drugs much and you've never really done them, it's important to get educated, read books, learn about recovery, learn about people that have been through this. Go to groups, go to parents of addicted loved one groups, go to a good Al-Anon group, figure out how to get help. Don't try to figure it out yourself because there's people that have gone there and been there. You're not alone in that.
Can a parent or should a parent expect their child just to grow out of it, meaning the drinking and doing drugs?
No, absolutely not. There are statistics that show that a lot of people that did a lot of alcohol and drugs in their 20s, in their 30s, do sometimes use less, right? There are statistics on that. That some people went from kind of like, I've read this study on that, where some people kind of just eventually kind of moved out of it, but it wasn't like they quit, right? This wasn't a person with an addiction problem. The younger you use drugs and alcohol, the more likely you are to carry the addiction into adulthood. So anybody starting before the age of 20, 24 is when they say the brain's kind of done growing in terms of mass, but anyone who starts below the age of 18 is at a massive risk for drug and alcohol addiction, right? If you start drinking at 21 or 25, your addiction level risk is going to go down. Now, it still depends on genetics. That's another factor. So genetics is a massive factor, and you can learn this through the stress dialysis model of mental health. You can Google that, stress diathesis model of mental health. Your genetics determine a lot. And when you combine your genetics with stress, you're more likely to have mental illnesses and you're more likely to have a tendency for addiction. Anybody that's got a mental health concern is more likely to be susceptible to addiction because if you have a mental health concern, drugs and alcohol can take away your feelings. They can make you feel chilled out. They can make you feel awake. They can make you do all sorts of things. So can parents expect their kids to grow out of it? No, do not ignore it. A lot of parents have told me they thought, oh, they'll just grow out of it. They were vaping when they were 15 or they were doing this. No. The younger the child, the more massive your interventions need to be. And what I mean by that is if they're under 15, where are they getting it? Get on all of their devices. I'm talking, remember I was be safe, talk about that. Yes, okay. Be a safe parent. Don't be a jerk. Don't shame them. But what I'm saying is this, it is your house. That is your phone. This is your child. They are not an adult. They do not have the ability to make good choices for themselves. So you may have to intervene in extreme ways when they're a teen. And the sooner the better, because the longer they do drugs and alcohol as a teen, it's exponential, the amount that you can be addicted as an adult. And that's because of brain science. Because when you're young, all of your neurons are learning to wire together in different patterns, right? We're learning to go, I want milk. I want food. I don't want to go to bed. I like to play. And I don't know how to sleep, right? But when we start interjecting alcohol and drugs, even at 10 or 11, we're learning, oh, this one does this to me. This one does this. One pill makes you smaller. One pill makes you, I'm starting to associate that, and I'm not learning to naturally calm myself, naturally sleep, naturally get more energy. I'm not using those. These chemicals are doing it for me. And therefore my brain is growing and learning that, and it's attaching neurons and meaning to that. Not good. Okay. So extreme intervention under 18, extreme. Get the kid away from it. If they have to go to a treatment center, they go to a treatment center. If they have to go to groups, if you have to change your life, if you have to upend your life, do it now. Because once they're 18, you have way less control. Actually, you have no control legally. The only control you have is that they probably need your money. or your
You know,
car.
what I'm thinking about is you're talking about, intervening early, and they're not just going to stop. And the thing I'm thinking about is I am the average of the 5 people that I spend the most time with. And so it's kind of like, if they're drinking and using, like, gosh, you got to figure out how to get them in a different environment, around different people, different friends, different groups. And I mean, that's just it's not just, hey, you got to intervene, but how do you intervene? And I think the most effective way to intervene is to really, like, take them and put them somewhere else so they have new friends. It's kind of like, as an adult, it's everything has to change for an alcoholic or a drug addict if they want to get clean and sober and they want it to stick long term. It's new friends, new hobbies, new interests, new like everything has to change. And I would imagine that you catch it earlier, maybe it's easier, but that's still, I mean, would you agree that that's still true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, catch it early. What I mean by intervention is immediately cut off their source.
Hmm.
Whatever freedoms you've been giving them so they could order vapes with your Amazon card or whatever they're doing. I
Right.
mean, like, get rid of that, first of all, monitor them better. But yeah, absolutely. Part of the ACRA program, the ACRA program, is getting the kid involved in pro-social activities. And if there's
Mhm.
no pro-social activities in their social groups and their friends, and all they do is antisocial activities like graffiti and using drugs and alcohol and partying every weekend, and this guy's parents aren't home, so we're going over there. No, you take them out of that environment. You change schools. You do, but you can't just do one thing. You think about
Right.
it like a pie chart.
Yeah.
Peer influence is huge. If you can get them in a positive group of peers, they're going to start adjusting to that, right? You can't and honestly, that might take a school after school program. That might take moving them schools. That might take going to a treatment center. All of that. Peer influence is massive. That's the first thing. Second thing, why are they using? How are they why are they using? What was it? Was it peers? Did it become a habit? Was it because they're stressed out all the time? Because they're feeling like a failure? I don't know. Could be. So that's a psychological component, right? Biological. Does anybody in your family have addictive tendencies? Oh, that's right. Great grandpa. Okay, well, their checkbox biologicals in place. So we're definitely already in a high risk situation. Next thing, where are they getting it? Cut off the source. All of that freedom has to go. If they've broken that freedom, you take that freedom away. You give them other freedoms, right? We don't want to be authoritarians, but we have to, if they're under 18, they don't just get access to the internet and the computer all the time anymore. Sorry. And like, we're monitoring you now. And then also family relationships, repairing those in family therapy. A lot of kids, their parents get divorced at like 8 years old or 5 years old or 3 years old, right? Or whatever. Or their parents separate. And the parents like, oh, they're over it by now. Nope, maybe not, right? I mean, a lot of kids hide that stuff. They're hiding their emotional pain because they don't want their life to be about emotional pain. They may not tell you. So it's all of the above, but friend influence, especially with teenagers. Think about a graph. Parent influence going down into the zeros. Child peer influence
Okay.
climbing up into the hundreds.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So yes, that's a huge one.
So, why is it recommended that parents also participate in individual or family therapy if their child is using drugs? Because at the end of the day, and this is what I hear all the time, it's their problem. It's not my problem. They're the ones that need help. Why is it that why is it that the whole family needs therapy, family therapy, and help, and need to be involved?
Well, here's the thing, we're stronger together. And humans have, from whenever anthropologists have studied humans, they always were in groups. And humans do better in groups as long as the groups are positive and not hostile, right? If we're in a hostile group, we're going to do horribly, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if our mental health, our physical health are going to go down. If you have a positive reinforcement of positive relationships and help and well-being and consequences and boundaries, you're going to do better. So it doesn't matter that the child is the one acting out. It's a family process, and the faster you can recognize that, the faster you're going to save somebody's life. Parents and loved ones and significant others are tremendously impacted by substance use. They are horribly impacted. They're traumatized. They're stressed out. They get insomnia. They can't sleep, and they try to fix all these things. But here's the deal: you can't fix these things in isolation. The pattern is going on. So get involved in family therapy. Absolutely, number one. I have seen whole families change their dynamics in only 6, 7 sessions, maybe even less, because there's some untalked about thing, or there's some role going on, or there's some unknown reason why the kid's using or whatever. You don't know until you go. Don't go there and be like, oh, it's their fault. They're dragging us into that. That is immature. Okay? I get it. I get that you're pissed off, that you don't want to have to go into family therapy and waste your time, supposedly, or take time out of your workday. The investment for parents is like 5 to 1. The more time the parents are invested, the more likely the kid's able to not be an addict in the rest of their life. That's my opinion, because when I see people with addictions try to break the addiction on their own, it is so hard. And especially if they're a kid, even worse. Young adults, even worse. So it's like, if that parent gets involved, go, we're with you. We're on your team. How can we help you? And here's our boundaries. And we're with you. We're giving you unlimited emotional support and boundaried financial and money and enabling. We're putting a boundary on that. That forces that child to grow up, because a lot of what drug use is coming from is delayed emotional growth. And that forces them to grow up and act like an adult. The second part, real quick, sorry I cut you off. Parents need to do their own therapy, because this is so stressful. Significant others, you need to do your own therapy. It is incredibly stressful. And people say, well, it costs money. I say, what is more important? Somebody's life or money? This is when you've got to spend money. Remember that rainy day? This is it. Okay? This is life or death. Get your work done so that you're not alienating the substance user, because a lot of substance users, when they get pissed off and alienated, they just go off by themselves, isolate, and use more, right? And that's not your fault, but you could potentially have an impact that's positive instead of negative.
Well, and the reality is that that parent they created the environment that is the environment that their child drank and used in.
Right.
And so people don't want to it's like, you gotta look at that. And people, they might not think they're responsible, but guess what? They are responsible, because it's their child and they created the environment.
Right. And I get that the child has choices, and they're going to make those choices, and they're influenced by peers, and they've got addictive tendencies, and they have an issue with authority or whatever. But what you've got to understand, just like couples therapy, it's not a you problem. It's not a me problem. It's an us problem. When there's addiction in a family, it means something is going wrong in the environment, and the parents know something's going wrong, and they keep trying the same thing. And that's the definition of insanity. You cannot keep trying the same thing. That is why you over and over and get the same results. You need to try something different. I know someone, he was actually, I believe, on Time Magazine. He was a former Phoenix police chief, and his kids were on opium and heroin. The former police chief of Phoenix. And he went public with his story, so I'm not like outing him, but you can look this up. And he's in the Parents of Addicted Loved Ones group. And you think a police chief, a nuclear family with a mom at home, and maybe she at work or something, and 2 boys, you'd think, wow, if anybody's kids are going to behave, it's going to be the police chief's kids. Well, no. They were huge heroin addicts, and they almost died, and he almost died trying to save them. Okay? So once he learned that he needed to go to therapy and change the dynamic approach, because the sons needed a different type of coaching than he was used to giving, right? And he needed to be different than what they needed, and they needed to be able to respect his rules in different ways. And once they got the whole family involved, guess what? They're all clean and sober now. But he said it wasn't until he got involved and he broke down his pride and his way of doing things, because you're right, that when we say responsible, you're not responsible for your kid hitting the pipe, but you are responsible for the fact that somehow, especially when they're under 18, they feel their needs aren't being met, and they're getting their needs met elsewhere, and that's drugs and alcohol. With young adults, a lot of that's about parents' expectations. You should be having a job. You should be going to college. You should be doing this. Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you paying for your own stuff? Blah, blah, blah. And that kid is feeling shame, right? And maybe they should be doing all that stuff. Okay? But that's not the way to handle it. And then what are they going to do? They're going to punish you. They're going to use. So important to get involved. If you treat the problem in isolation, it won't go away.
Right.
So,
Is there a question that you wanted me to ask you today? If so, what would that question be?
oh, gee, I didn't really think of that. I guess what you could ask me, what would you say to people that are cynical?
What would you say to people that are cynical?
I would say this. I would say that's inside of you. And you've had a traumatic experience, you've had a difficult time, you've had a bad experience. That doesn't mean you give up, right? There are parents out there that have lost their kids to drugs and alcohol, right? Those parents have a horrible existence in front of them to deal with that loss, right? And I don't even know what that's like, but that sounds horrible. But it that is a reality for a lot of people. And I think some of those parents are giving back to the community. They're getting involved in these groups. They're helping out. Some of them, it's all they can do just to work on their own mental health, right? And that's okay. And we need to honor that. But right now, if you're a person who hasn't lost their kid to alcohol and drugs, and you're feeling cynical, like, oh, this won't work. Oh, therapy, books, podcasts, family therapy, sounds like a bunch of BS. Okay, that's coming from you, right? And maybe that's because it stresses you out. Maybe because it's not from your culture of origin. That's not what was valued. But the answers are out there. The hard part is implementing those answers. The wisdom, the knowledge of drugs and alcohol and what to do is all out there. The hard part is, how do you implement that in your life, in your family's life? And that takes wisdom, and that takes a lot of work to translate our concepts to actually the relationship and change those patterns. Family patterns, for most people, have lasted at least 18, 15, however long your child's been alive. Those family patterns have existed. Undoing family patterns is so difficult. I've dealt with it in my own family, and undoing those roles and trying to respond differently to people is so difficult. And I think that's why a lot of people just want to blame the user. Oh, well, they're just a drug addict. They're an addict. They're this, they're that, they're lazy. That's such a bypass. Yeah, maybe they are those things, right? Maybe that's what you want to label them as, but they're still a human being, and you can have an impact. And I think that's what I want to tell people that are cynical, is that you can't give up. If you give up, throw in the towel, that's the result you're going to get.
Okay, we're coming up to the end of the hour. Where can people find you, learn more about your program, learn more about your clinic? Share with me how people can find out more about you and connect.
Well, the easiest way is if you listen to podcasts or you have YouTube, just go on the internet or go on an app and type in the Intentional Clinician podcast. It's called the Intentional Clinician Psychology and Philosophy. That's the easiest way, because on my podcast websites, there's all the links to everything I do. You could also just Google Paul Krauss MA LPC or Health for Life Counseling in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We can't see people out of state. I do have a license in Arizona, so I can consult with some people there, and I do trainings in Arizona for behavioral health organizations when I'm there. But essentially, that's the best way to find out about me. Our blog at healthforlifegr.com we have over 350 blogs about mental health and substance use and other things like that. So if you want to read some blogs, there's free information up there. And the course you can find, it's just called What Do We Do Now for the Parents of Young Adults, Paul Krauss. If you Google that, you'll find it. So yeah.
Awesome.
That's about it.
Paul, this has been great. I appreciate you. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that there's some people out there that got some really valuable information. So thank you so much. And that does it.
Thank you, Tim. It's been my pleasure.
That does it for my time with Paul Krauss. Thank you for watching I Love Being Sober. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. If you found this video to be of value, be sure to like it, subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos, leave a comment if you have a question, if you've got something to say. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism. So if you or someone you know is struggling, be sure to reach out to us. You can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, or our information is in the comment section below. And we provide everything from detox, inpatient, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services. So either we'll be able to help you, or we'll be able to refer you to people or treatment centers that might be a better fit. So I will see you in the next video.